1. Shock hook. Alan Dershowitz thought he could reduce a congresswoman to silence with a single smug insult. Instead, the silence ended up being his OWN. It began in a chamber heavy with tension, the kind of room where reputations are tested and every word carries the weight of history. Dershowitz leaned back in his chair, his trademark smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. To him, this wasn't just another debate. It was an opportunity to flex, to remind everyone that he was still the lion of the courtroom, the man who could cut down opponents with a single dismissive phrase. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, steady and unflinching. She knew his type well, men who mistook condescension for brilliance, who believed years of accolades gave them a license to belittle. Dershowitz cleared his throat, leaned forward, and launched the opening strike. His words dripped with arrogance, questioning not just her position, but her very right to speak on the issue at hand. It wasn't substance, it was swagger. A lawyer's trick dressed up as authority. For a split second, the room froze. You could feel the collective inhale, audience members, colleagues, even critics leaning in. The silence wasn't empty, it was electric. Everyone knew what had just happened. A titan of legal fame had tried to humiliate a freshman lawmaker in front of the nation. Dershowitz basked in it. He expected the smirks, the nods, the validation. He expected Crockett to stammer, to retreat, to fold under the pressure of his reputation. But Crockett didn't move. Her gaze held firm, steady as a steel beam, while the smugness in his grin grew wider. That was the moment. The pause before the storm. Even those who didn't know her well sensed it. Something was about to break, and it wasn't going to be her. The air tightened. The cameras zoomed closer. And for the first time in a long time, Alan Dershowitz, master of the verbal strike, had no idea what was coming next, because the way Crockett responded left even Dershowitz scrambling for words. 2. Raising the stakes. That to understand why this clash mattered, you have to understand the weight Alan Dershowitz carried into that room. For decades, his name had been synonymous with courtroom theatrics, television appearances, and the kind of intellectual swagger that made headlines. He was the professor who could dismantle opponents with a smirk, the legal giant whose voice had filled lecture halls at Harvard and echoed across news panels. He thrived on being the smartest man in any room, and he wanted everyone to know it. But with that reputation came something else, a pattern of arrogance, a habit of turning debate into condescension. To Dershowitz, disagreement was less about substance and more about dominance. It wasn't enough to win. He had to belittle, to make the other side appear naive or unworthy of sharing the stage. That style had worked before, because most people, faced with the weight of his resume, shrank back. Jasmine Crockett wasn't built to shrink. She entered that room not with the gilded credentials of an Ivy League pedigree, but with something sharper, lived experience. Where Dershowitz spoke from the ivory tower, Crockett spoke from the grit of working-class communities, from the trenches of criminal defense, from the pain and resilience of those too often dismissed. She wasn't there to impress him. She was there to represent the people who had sent her to Congress, the ones who knew what it meant to be talked down to and ignored. That contrast, elitism versus authenticity, was why this moment mattered far beyond the walls they occupied. To one side stood Dershowitz, cloaked in privilege and reputation, confident that his words could cut anyone down. To the other stood Crockett, underestimated by many in the establishment, yet carrying with her a strength forged not in classrooms, but in lived struggle. It wasn't just a debate. It was a mirror, a reflection of two Americas, one that clung to old hierarchies of power, and another that demanded recognition for voices long silenced. And here's the twist. Crockett knew exactly how she was being perceived. Critics had written her off as brash, too fiery, too unpolished for the world of legal heavyweights. Yet that underestimation was her advantage. Because while Dershowitz sharpened his insult like a weapon, Crockett prepared to turn his arrogance back on him with a calm precision that no one expected. In that room, the stakes weren't simply personal. They were symbolic. Every progressive, every immigrant, every person who had ever been told they didn't belong could see themselves in her. And every sneer that crossed Dershowitz's face wasn't just directed at Crockett, it was directed at them. That's why the moment was electric. This wasn't just two individuals sparring. It was elitism colliding with experience, arrogance colliding with authenticity. And for the first time, Dershowitz was about to discover that his old playbook didn't work against someone who refused to be intimidated, because what happens next isn't just a debate. It's a masterclass that the internet couldn't stop replaying. 3. Antagonist backstory. For decades, Alan Dershowitz carved his name into the American consciousness as one of the nation's most celebrated legal minds. Harvard Law School professor, high-profile defense attorney, best-selling author. His resume was long, polished, and intimidating. He had argued in front of the Supreme Court, represented celebrities whose names defined entire eras, and cultivated an aura of brilliance that demanded respect. If there was ever a figure who embodied the ivory tower of American law, it was Dershowitz. But brilliance is never the whole story. Dershowitz wasn't just known for winning arguments. He was known for the way he won them. A sharp tongue, a theatrical pause, a smirk that told the world he had already decided the other side wasn't worth his time. His debates were less about collaboration or truth-seeking and more about dominance. He wielded intellect the way a warrior wields a sword, cutting, slicing, and ensuring that no one left the stage without remembering his superiority. That style earned him admirers, but it also earned him critics. For every courtroom victory, there were countless moments when his condescension overshadowed his substance. He often dismissed challengers not with careful rebuttals, but with clever put-downs, as if intellect alone gave him license to humiliate. His television appearances were masterclasses in smugness. Leaning back in his chair, arms folded, eyes half-lidded with the satisfaction of a man certain of his genius. And here lies the contradiction. For all his brilliance, Dershowitz seemed blind to the corrosive effect of arrogance. He mistook fear for respect, silence for defeat. Time and again, he confused the absence of pushback with validation. Few dared to challenge him directly, and fewer still managed to walk away without bearing the scars of his rhetoric. In the arena of debate, he played the part of Goliath, confident that no David could sling a stone sharp enough to pierce his armor. But Goliath always carries the seeds of his own downfall. The same arrogance that propelled Dershowitz to prominence made him vulnerable. By dismissing challengers, he failed to see their strength. By demanding deference, he blinded himself to the rising tide of voices unwilling to bow. In a changing America, where lived experience carried as much weight as academic pedigree, Dershowitz's style was increasingly out of step. Yet he couldn't see it. He believed the old rules still applied, that intimidation still silenced, that reputation still guaranteed victory. This is why his clash with Jasmine Crockett was so pivotal. To Dershowitz, she was just another opponent to swat away, another chance to remind the world of his authority. He didn't see her story. He didn't respect her fire. He didn't recognize that the very qualities he dismissed as unpolished were the weapons she carried into the ring. He saw himself as unassailable, and that was his mistake, because arrogance breeds blindness, and blind men often walk straight into their downfall. Dershowitz, the Goliath of legal intellect, had faced countless challengers before, but this time was different. This time, his opponent wasn't interested in playing by the old rules, and when he turned his fire on Jasmine Crockett, he expected the usual deference. What he got instead? 4. Protagonist backstory. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin in marble courtrooms or ivy-draped universities. It begins in the quieter corners of America, where opportunity was not handed out but wrestled for, where the struggles of everyday people shaped her into someone who understood grit in a way no textbook ever could. Born into modest means, Crockett grew up watching how hard her community worked, how often they were overlooked, and how easily the powerful dismissed their pain. Those early lessons stayed with her. They became the foundation of the fighter she would one day become. She wasn't supposed to be in the rooms she now occupies. The odds were against it. For every door she knocked on, there were walls that seemed designed to keep people like her out. Yet she pushed. Education became her weapon, and the law became her language. But even as she climbed, she never forgot where she started. She wasn't studying law to polish her resume. She was studying law because she knew too many people who had been silenced by a system that never heard them. Her journey into law wasn't a straight path of prestige. It was one of sacrifice. Long hours, endless debt, nights of doubt. She defended the people no one else wanted to defend. Clients who couldn't afford the fancy firms. Defendants who had been written off as statistics. In dingy courtrooms and cramped offices, she sharpened her skills not through theory, but through fire. Every case she took reminded her that the law wasn't an abstract concept. It was life or death, freedom or chains, dignity or humiliation. Those years hardened her resolve. She didn't just learn how to argue. She learned how to stand unshaken when the world tried to shake her. She didn't just memorize statutes. She learned to hear the pain behind every story that walked through her door. Crockett wasn't becoming a lawyer to climb some professional ladder. She was becoming one to be a shield for those who had none. That spirit carried her into politics. Running for Congress wasn't about ambition. It was about responsibility. She saw firsthand how policies crafted in distant chambers crushed lives on the ground. She saw what happened when those chambers were filled with people who had never once struggled to pay rent, never once felt dismissed by a judge, never once been underestimated because of where they came from. And she vowed to be the voice that would not bend, the presence that would not bow. But Crockett was more than a fighter. She was a truth-teller. Her voice carried an authenticity that couldn't be faked, because it was born from lived experience. When she spoke, it wasn't rehearsed rhetoric. It was raw, it was real, and it was rooted in a life that had known both struggle and triumph. That combination, fighter and truth-teller, made her a rare figure in modern politics. Still, she was underestimated. Establishment figures scoffed, critics sneered, opponents whispered that she was too fiery, too blunt, too unpolished to last in the refined halls of Congress. But what they saw as flaws were the very qualities her supporters loved. She wasn't polished to please. She was sharp to protect. She wasn't careful to avoid offense. She was bold to tell the truth. And in an America weary of arrogance, her fire was exactly what people were waiting for. That's what made her confrontation with Dershowitz so symbolic. On paper, he was everything she wasn't: elite, established, celebrated by institutions that had never celebrated her. But what Crockett carried could not be measured by titles or accolades. She carried the weight of her community. She carried the scars of her own journey. She carried the dignity of people who had been told no 1,000 times and yet kept standing. And that life story, those scars, were about to become her sharpest weapon. 5. Debate escalation. The clash did not ignite all at once. It simmered, then boiled over. Dershowitz, seated with his familiar air of superiority, shifted forward like a predator preparing to pounce. His voice cut through the chamber, sharp and deliberate, designed less to question and more to corner. He wielded a gotcha with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime perfecting verbal traps. His challenge wasn't about substance. It was about spectacle. He leaned back after his jab, eyes scanning the room for validation. On his side, smirks spread quickly, subtle nods confirming that the professor had struck again. They had seen this performance before, the master dismantling a challenger with a few choice words, leaving them flustered and defensive. It was a play he had run countless times, and he was confident this would be no different. But across the aisle, the mood was starkly different. Supporters of Crockett shifted uneasily in their seats, concern etched into their faces. They had seen these traps swallow many before. They knew the smugness in Dershowitz's tone wasn't just arrogance. It was a dare. It was a demand for her to prove she even belonged in the same room as him. And in that split second, all eyes darted toward her. Crockett sat motionless, her hands folded neatly, her gaze locked directly on him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't bristle. She let his words hang in the air, every syllable dripping with the weight of condescension. The pause stretched, the tension thickened. To outsiders, it might have looked like hesitation. To those who knew her, it was preparation. The silence unnerved him. Dershowitz had expected a quick retort, a stumble, some sign that she had been rattled. Instead, he was met with composure so steady it almost mocked his attempt at dominance. The cameras zoomed in. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. The chamber had become a pressure cooker, each second stretching longer than the last. On Dershowitz's face, the smug grin widened, but faintly, just faintly, there was a flicker of impatience. He thrived on quick victories, on opponents rushing to respond, on moments where he could cut them off and declare triumph. But Crockett wasn't rushing. She wasn't giving him anything. Around the room, breaths were held. You could feel the division, some certain she was cornered, others hoping against hope that she would deliver something none of them expected. It was more than a debate now. It was theater, it was tension, it was the kind of moment that decided reputations. And then, slowly, she shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with a calm resolve. Crockett leaned forward, eyes steady, voice unshaken. The room braced itself. They knew, everyone knew, that whatever came next would decide who owned the moment. But Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward and delivered the sentence that flipped the entire room. Point 6. The mic drop counterattack. When Crockett finally spoke, her words didn't come fast or frenzied. They came deliberate, measured, like a surgeon making the first precise cut. Her voice was calm, unshaken, but laced with the kind of authority that didn't need volume to command attention. "Professor," she began, her eyes never breaking from his, "you've made a career out of telling people what they can't do, what they're not qualified to say, who's not worthy of being in the room. But let me remind you, your credentials don't cancel my experience. And they certainly don't silence my voice." A murmur swept through the chamber. She hadn't raised her tone, but the weight of her words landed like a gavel striking oak. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reframing. She wasn't playing defense. She was reclaiming the ground he had tried to seize. Dershowitz shifted in his seat, the smugness flickering. He attempted a chuckle, that practiced sound meant to dismiss her as naive, to suggest she hadn't understood the complexity of his argument. "Congresswoman," he interrupted, waving a hand as though brushing her away. "You're oversimplifying," she cut in, her voice firm but controlled. "No, Professor, I'm clarifying. Because what you call oversimplification is actually the lived reality of millions of people you've never had to answer to. You see theory. I see impact. You see arguments. I see lives. And if you think I'm going to let you reduce that to a soundbite, you've underestimated the wrong person." The murmurs grew louder, a ripple moving across the audience like wind through tall grass. Heads turned, eyes widened. For once, Dershowitz's interruption had not derailed the momentum. It had amplified it. Crockett leaned forward now, her posture no longer still but engaged, unflinching. "You've spent your life in classrooms where no one dared challenge you, where your word was the final say. But this isn't Harvard, and I'm not one of your students. I am a Congresswoman of the United States, elected by people who've lived realities you've only ever read about. So when you try to embarrass me with your credentials, remember this. My credentials are written in the lives I've fought for, the cases I've defended, and the communities I represent." Gasps punctuated the air. A few in the back even nodded openly, unable to hide their admiration. On the other side, those who had smirked earlier began to sit still, their confidence waning as the balance of power shifted. Dershowitz tried again, his voice a shade tighter now, his interjection less smooth. "With respect, Congresswoman, I'm only pointing out the—" She didn't let him finish. Her tone sharpened, though still steady. "With respect, Professor, pointing out isn't the same as condescending. You don't get to decide whose experience is valid. You don't get to talk down to someone because their path didn't mirror yours. And if your argument depends on diminishing others instead of debating substance, then maybe it's not as strong as you think." That line landed like thunder. Even those on Dershowitz's side couldn't hide the shift. A cough here, a shuffle there, small betrayals of discomfort. Crockett wasn't just holding her ground. She was taking his. And then came the moment. Her voice softened, but the intensity sharpened to a blade. "You tried to embarrass me. But you see, I can't be embarrassed by someone who doesn't understand what I represent. You wanted silence from me. What you got instead is the truth. And the truth doesn't rattle, it resonates." For the first time, Dershowitz had no immediate reply. His lips parted as though words were forming, but nothing came out. The silence he had once wielded like a weapon now hung over him like a defeat. His eyes darted briefly, searching for footing that wasn't there. Around him, the energy shifted unmistakably. A low hum filled the room. Murmurs, nods, even a few whispered exclamations of admiration. The cameras caught every angle. Crockett composed, poised, unyielding. Dershowitz visibly faltering, his authority crumbling not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow erosion for all to see. Outside the chamber, the internet was already catching fire. Clips circulated within minutes. Twitter threads formed. Crockett just destroyed Dershowitz with pure composure. TikToks looped her line about lived experience versus theory. Instagram Reels showed side-by-side shots of his smirk fading and her eyes locking in. What had begun as his attempt to humiliate her was becoming her defining moment. And yet, inside the room, the tension lingered. Dershowitz finally leaned back, a forced smile tugging at his lips, but the performance had cracked. He looked less like the master of the stage and more like a man trying to mask the fact that the stage had slipped away from him. Crockett, by contrast, didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her calm was victory enough. She had done what few dared to do. She had dismantled the so-called Goliath without ever raising her voice, without ever losing control. The silence belonged to him now. The authority belonged to her. But it wasn't just Dershowitz who felt the impact. The ripple effects would shake the conversation far beyond that room. 7. The aftermath shockwaves. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, the moment had already escaped the confines of the chamber. Social media erupted in a way that no one could have predicted. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett claps back and hashtag truth over smugness began trending within minutes, as clips of her calm dismantling of Dershowitz circulated like wildfire. TikTok users replayed her lines, slowing them down, adding captions, transforming her composure into a viral symbol of resistance. Memes proliferated, some clever, some savage, all celebrating the victory of dignity over arrogance. Across platforms, viewers praised Crockett. Comments poured in. Calm destroyed arrogance. She didn't just respond. She owned the room. Truth, smugness, every time. People shared the clips with friends, colleagues, family members, insisting they watch, insisting they understand what had just happened. For many, it wasn't only political theater, it was validation. Validation that voices often dismissed, voices shaped by lived struggle, could rise above elitism and command respect. Television panels dissected the exchange with fervor. Analysts replayed the moment in slow motion, debating Dershowitz's missteps and Crockett's precision. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to her poise, breaking down how she had anticipated his interruptions and transformed them into opportunities to assert authority. YouTubers, known for political commentary and dramatized breakdowns, layered her words with cinematic music, turning a 15-minute debate moment into an epic narrative of justice prevailing. Celebrities and activists joined the chorus. Influencers whose platforms spanned millions praised her composure. Actors, journalists, and advocates shared clips, tagging her with admiration. "This is how you handle someone who thinks their reputation allows them to intimidate," one activist wrote. Another declared, "If you ever doubted that experience can outshine pedigree, watch this." Crockett's calm courage became more than a moment. It became a movement. Even those on the other side, those who had initially dismissed her, could not ignore the clarity of her approach. Online discussions weren't limited to applause. They were debates over respect, privilege, and the power of poise. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate had transformed into a masterclass on influence and control, replayed in newsrooms, living rooms, and social feeds across the country. But the resonance went beyond entertainment. It was a cultural touchstone. For immigrants, for communities often sidelined, for those who had been underestimated and undervalued, Crockett's words carried a message that reverberated far beyond the chamber. Your story matters, your voice matters, and your dignity cannot be bought or borrowed. It must be claimed. The room that had witnessed Dershowitz faltering was now a microcosm of the larger reaction. Clips were dissected not only for legal brilliance, but for their emotional gravity. Viewers debated her strategy, praised her restraint, and marveled at the way she had stayed true to herself, turning every insult into a reflection of her strength. The quiet victories were louder than any verbal jab could have been. And yet, amid the cacophony of likes, shares, comments, and hashtags, the significance of the moment was deeper than the noise online. The conversation extended into households, classrooms, offices, and forums where people reflected on what it meant to confront arrogance without aggression, to assert truth without hostility, and to stand firm when the odds seemed stacked against you. Yet what mattered most wasn't the noise online. It was the lesson Crockett left echoing for America itself. 8. Resolution. In the quiet aftermath of the viral moment, Crockett took a step back from the heat of confrontation to reflect on what had truly unfolded. She reframed the clash, not as a personal victory, but as a lesson in perspective. Experience isn't about privilege, it's about service, she said. The statement was simple, yet profound. It captured the essence of what the debate had really been about. Not titles, not pedigrees, not the cloud of reputation, but the weight of action, the proof of dedication, the embodiment of values and service to others. The lesson rippled outward. Arrogance, no matter how polished, is fleeting. Dignity, grounded in purpose and principle, endures. In a world dominated by noise and spectacle, Crockett's calm clarity became a beacon. She demonstrated that truth, when wielded with precision and patience, silences smugness without raising a hand, without needing theatrics. It is not the loudest voice that commands respect. It is the voice that cannot be shaken, that speaks from integrity and lived experience. Her moment was more than individual triumph. It was a reflection on what democracy demands of its citizens. In a system where power often seeks to intimidate and silence, the ability to stand firm, to articulate truth clearly, and to represent the unheard is the cornerstone of a functioning republic. Crockett's performance reminded people that legitimacy is earned not through connections or status, but through authenticity and accountability. Every word she spoke, every pause she held, was a reinforcement of a principle larger than any one person. That respect is earned through service, not entitlement. Beyond politics, the encounter resonated culturally. It became a symbol of resilience for communities who have often been marginalized or dismissed. It underscored the value of persistence, of showing up, and of holding firm even when the world expects submission. Crockett's composure, her unflinching gaze, and her moral clarity offered a model for how to confront systems of power with strength that is both gentle and formidable. For many, she became more than a congresswoman in that moment. She became a symbol of calm resilience, a figure who showed that courage and dignity can coexist with empathy and reason. And the lesson extended into identity, pride, and belonging. In an America grappling with inequality, elitism, and prejudice, Crockett's words affirmed that lived experience, when coupled with integrity, is a force that cannot be diminished. The encounter wasn't just a debate over legal points or rhetorical skill. It was a microcosm of what it means to fight for one's place in society while elevating the collective good. Her victory was quiet, but seismic. It didn't rely on theatrics or insults. It relied on the quiet, undeniable power of truth lived fully, consistently, and unapologetically. The applause may fade, the hashtags may trend for only a day, but the principles Crockett illuminated endure. She reminded a nation that arrogance collapses under the weight of service and integrity, while dignity radiates long after the noise has passed. And that's why this wasn't just a debate. It was a mirror for America. 9. Outro. Alan Dershowitz tried to embarrass Jasmine Crockett, but ended up silenced by her calm truth. What began as an attempt to intimidate and belittle transformed into a masterclass of composure, strategy, and moral clarity. In that chamber, the loudest voice did not win. The voice grounded in experience, integrity, and service did. Crockett reminded everyone watching that true authority is earned through action and respect, not titles or arrogance. The moment carries a universal message. Arrogance crumbles when confronted with dignity, and truth always outlasts smugness. It wasn't just a personal victory. It was a demonstration of how values, courage, and clarity can shift the balance in any arena, whether it be politics, law, or daily life. Crockett's calm resilience stands as a symbol for anyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told their voice doesn't matter. She showed that standing firm, speaking truth, and representing your principles can silence even the most intimidating opposition. That if you believe truth still matters, share this moment. Let others witness how composure and integrity can topple arrogance. Subscribe, join the community, and let's keep amplifying voices of dignity. Because moments like this don't just inspire, they remind us that courage, clarity, and respect are not only possible, but contagious. Every share, every comment, every discussion keeps the lesson alive and spreads the reminder. Standing for truth is never wasted, and dignity always stands tall.